It's very clear the American economy is slowing, and the R word, recession, is back on people's lips. So that could be just around the corner. But the important point you make is, in fact, most of the tariffs haven't been in effect. So when you don't impose a terrible policy, you shouldn't be so surprised when that terrible policy that you didn't impose doesn't actually hurt the economy too much.
Hi, I'm Fergus Macphee and welcome to the Trump Report on Times Radio. A reminder, you can watch us every day, Monday through Friday on our YouTube channel, and you can also listen to the show wherever you get your podcasts. I'm delighted to say that joining me again today is Justin Wolfers, Professor of Public Policy and Economics at the University of Michigan. Justin, fresh back from a trip to Japan as well. How are you doing?
Feeling a bit bleary-eyed, but it's good to see things outside the US and hear some other perspectives.
Well, we might get into some of those perspectives in a little bit, but when I'm talking to you on the Trump Report, it usually means one of two things, and that is that tariffs are back in the news. And that's because as of today, that deadline has passed and Donald Trump's tariffs have officially come into effect on dozens of countries around the world. Now, he took to Truth Social last night and said that billions of dollars are now flowing into the US and that tariffs are flowing into the USA at levels not thought even possible. I guess, what a day to be an American citizen.
Mate, it's just, I wish I could say I couldn't be prouder, but I could be actually. What an amazing headline. A Republican president understands that when you impose tax on Americans, it raises tax revenue. It's only 4 weeks ago when we were debating the budget that Republicans were telling me that when you raise tax rates, when you lowered tax rates, you'd raise revenue. Now they've discovered that when you raise tax rates, you raise revenue. And wow.
We've been talking about these for so long. I think this is probably the fourth or fifth time I've spoken to you about it. They are now finally in effect after being put off for so long. What effect will this have on the US and the global economy?
It's a good starting point there, Fergus, because I have been getting the question a lot. If tariffs are so bad, why is the American economy doing okay? And first of all, we now believe the American economy is doing okay, but not well. A few weeks ago, the data seemed to be suggesting the American economy was withstanding this well. It's very clear the American economy is slowing, and the R word, recession, is back on people's lips. So that could be just around the corner. But the important point you make is, in fact, most of the tariffs haven't been in effect. So when you don't impose a terrible policy, you shouldn't be so surprised when that terrible policy that you didn't impose doesn't actually hurt the economy too much. So now they're real. The dog that was chasing the car finally caught the car. And, you know it's finally the deadline because today is either April 2nd or it's April 9th or it's July 9th or it's August 1st, or finally we're here at August 7th, the fifth of the never to be delayed deadlines. And I think the tariffs are actually on right now.
Is this it? They are all on, or are we still waiting for anything else to come out?
Right, so is this it has many dimensions to it. So one of the reasons the tariffs haven't hit the economy is they get announced at a different point from when they turn on. And often what happens in between is the president has a hiccup or a cough or changes his mind or something else. So this time they're announced as I understand it, and I should add, I just arrived back in the country. They're on, or they're on at midnight. So then that says they're on. Now, a couple of things. That's not the end of the story. So first of all, there's various tariffs which are in their own either 2 week or 90-day delays because that's the president's preferred tactic. So yesterday he announced a new 50% tariff on India, which I think doesn't go into effect for a few days yet. There's a current tariff pause, which is not a tariff pause, it's a pause on very high tariffs down to merely very high tariffs with China. And you could say, is this it? Is this the end of tariff uncertainty? Has the president finally, 10 years after he rode down the golden escalator, made up his mind what it is he wants to do on tariffs? And the drama of the last few months, is that finally behind us? To which I'm sorry to tell you the answer almost certainly is no. So this is basically Liberation Day Part 2, the summer sequel. Basically, the tariffs he loved and then decided he didn't like, he's back to deciding he likes, but he'll tweak them a little bit, and these are on. But tariff uncertainty is by no means over, which is the president has understood this as a tool that brings him the spotlight. And there's lots of other things he'd rather not be talking about right now. And it's also a tool that he uses to bully other countries, and he likes to do that. And so already you're seeing there's threats on India, there's threats on other countries. And so I think the word tariff is going to remain very much part of our vocabulary for the next few months, which means, and I'm so sorry for you about this, Fergus, you and I might end up talking again in the future. And I know it's better when you can avoid economists, but mate, this is a telenovela, a soap opera, and a drama that just won't quit.
I'm sure we'll be seeing plenty more of you on the Trump report. You teased it slightly earlier. You mentioned the R word. And I know I've been following you on X. I've been following your posts on X, and I know you've been quite downbeat about the US economy since Trump fired the Bureau of Labor Statistics around a week ago. You said it feels like something has cracked in the US economy then. What did you mean by that?
Yeah. So to review first of all for your audience, the most important economic statistics that come out are the jobs report. It's important because jobs matter, but it's important also because it's a very timely indicator, and it's one with a very long history, and it surveys tens of thousands of companies across the economy, and so it's got all signal, not all signal, enormous amounts of signal to noise. And that had been suggesting that the US economy had been moving pretty quickly. And then last Friday, we discovered that as they get new forms in, as businesses tell us, normally you're meant to send in your form saying how many workers you had on your payroll pretty quickly, but some of them take a while. And so then those numbers are revised as those new numbers come in. And we learned, in fact, that not only was the economy quite disappointing in July, but April and May, as more companies sent in their forms, turned out to be much worse than we thought. The economy is doing what economists call growing below potential, which is, well, maybe that term tells you something right there, which is there's a basic rate where we think the economy can keep up and things are going well, and we're growing slower than that. Now, a recession is when things are worse again, when you're actually shrinking. But we certainly thought we were quite some distance away from a recession. Those revisions tell us we're a whole heck of a lot closer. The second thing those revisions tell us is we thought, you and I talked several months ago, that Trump's shenanigans may well hurt the economy. And when they appeared not to have, maybe you and I thought that we were wrong. Well, what we learned is we weren't. And as a result, not only the past shenanigans, but subsequent shenanigans probably are also going to hurt the economy. So we have less of a buffer and more of a reason to think that this is the sort of shock that actually drives an economy into a recession. And then the president did one more thing. He fired the chief statistician in charge of putting together the jobs report. It's called the Bureau of Labor Statistics. The boss is called the commissioner. He fired her because he didn't like her numbers. This is not a thing a serious president does. It's not a thing a serious economy does. When you take that step towards denying, and he is denying economic reality, and towards changing the incentives for people around you to tell you the truth, that's how banana republics and autocracies start. This is a deeply worrying step. If the next commissioner turns out to be a Trump lackey, people won't be willing to invest, for instance, in inflation index bonds, because they'll be indexed into a number that if Trump continues down this path, there's no reason any of us will believe. If we're in a world in which we don't believe the government statistics, investors are going to feel very wary about investing in the United States. Financial markets are going to really change. Rumors are going to have much larger effects than they otherwise would, because we no longer have an economic foundation that pins things down. And if this is a sign of the way the president wants to run his administration, we've seen this movie before. We've seen it in Argentina. It didn't end well. We've seen it in other countries. This is really, really a deeply worrying step.
If we just quickly talk about those numbers that he didn't like, I think the figure is that they showed the labour market had only added sort of 72,000 new jobs in but July, which was much below expectations. When you're talking about things like the labour market not doing as well as hoped, does that suggest that that is directly hitting working class Americans and subsequently like Trump's base of supporters?
So the first thing is we know that we're barely creating jobs, and that's hurting the people who are not getting those jobs. We know that unemployment rates of less educated workers are several times higher than that of highly educated workers. I can't tell you who didn't get a job last week and how they voted, but it's a reasonable guess that this hurt working class and many of Trump's supporters the most. The other thing we know from past experience, and this is why it's so important to avoid recessions, recessions hurt the working class more than anyone else. Even during the next downturn, Fergus, you and I are going to keep, if we don't keep our jobs, we'll be able to get some other job. But folks with fewer options may well be looking at the unemployment lines.
I just want to ask. This is a little bit more of a existential question, perhaps a bit more wide-reaching. You mentioned this. Obviously, some people have suggested the economy is doing slightly better, perhaps. I want to ask you the difference between a healthy stock market, and it is a relatively healthy stock market at the moment, and a healthy economy.
Yeah, very good question. So, look, there's an old expression that the stock market is not the economy, and that's important to say. There's also very good reason for us to look at the stock market. Let me explain why. When you're buying a stock, you're buying a part of a company. What does it mean to own part of a company? It means that you get all of its future profits. And so when people are buying a stock, they're essentially betting on the future profitability of companies. When they're buying American stock, they're betting on the future profitability of American companies. And so on the one hand, it's very fashionable to say, let's not focus too much on the stock market. And there's good reasons, and I'll come back to those. But I also want to make sure viewers get the other side of that story. We do watch this because, first of all, it's forward looking, right? It's all about the future profitability of a company. Most of our economic indicators are backward looking. They're telling us about what happened in May, April, and June. Secondly, if you've walked down Wall Street, you'll notice that there are thousands of very highly paid, highly intelligent quants who spend most of their time with computers poring over data. And so think about that as an information processing machine. It's a very, very sophisticated machine that takes bets based on basically all the data in the world and then tries to figure out the future profitability of American companies. I would trust that machine to be smarter about the future than even a boyishly handsome economist like myself. Trust the machine because it represents the wisdom of so many people. So that's why I want to watch it. Now, I should also be clear what it is a set of bets on the future profitability of American business. Notice some things that it's not. Most households get most of their income from labor income. What the stock market's about is capital income. And so if there were things that the administration were doing that would help businesses but not help workers, the stock market would rise even as your audience would see their economic fortunes decline. The other thing is the stock market consists of big companies. And a lot of what Trump is doing may well help big companies, but small companies, the dry cleaner you go to, are never listed on the stock market. And so if the administration were imposing policies that would help big companies but hurt small companies, the stock market would rise even if the economy was going south. And if you think about the tariff regime, we've just imposed the tariffs, but what Trump started almost in the same day as a series of carve-outs and exemptions for politically powerful interests that can convince him that these tariffs will be painful. That's going to be big business. That's going to be Apple and Microsoft and OpenAI. That's going to be Nvidia. It's going to be Lenovo. It's going to be Exxon. What it's not going to be is small business. And so that's the sense in which we say the stock market's not the economy. The other sense, of course, is that when you're buying stocks, you care about how they're taxed. And so if you were to change the taxation, if you were to cut the taxes on capital, but raise taxes on workers, that would cause the stock market to rise even as workers felt their lives were getting somewhat worse. And again, what we see is that most of what the president's doing is stuff that will help that subsector of the economy that happens to be traded on the stock market. Now, having said all of that, let me tell you a couple of things to think about here. So first of all, the stock market's not the economy, so therefore a high stock market does not mean that Trump hasn't done any damage. Fair enough. Secondly, to the extent that tariffs are going to help anyone, they're going to help big American businesses. So if there is anything to be gained here, they're downstream of the profitability of American businesses rising. So therefore, if stocks don't rise when you impose tariffs, that tells you that not even the folks who are most likely to benefit are expected to benefit. So it's a very compelling argument. If they were to rise, it just says, well, this is the first part of a policy that involves some costs and some benefits. The third thing, and I really want to note this, there is one pattern in the stock market that's absolutely unbeaten. Every time Trump leans into Trumpist policies, he imposes tariffs, he passes the big beautiful bill, he tells Tim Cook what to do, he tells Harvard what to do, and on it goes. Every single time he does that, the stock market falls. And every time he tacos, which is to say he backs off, the stock market rises. The stock market right now is largely rising on the back of enormous optimism about AI. And to his credit, the president has done very little to destroy that. But every time he moves to fire Jay Powell, to remove central bank independence, to reduce the independence of the statistical authorities, to raise tariffs, stocks fall. So that's telling you even big American businesses dislike these policies.
We're talking about big American businesses and Apple there. Who will be the happier out of Tim Cook and Donald Trump? Because I think the president said he was going to impose 100% tariffs on imports of semiconductor chips made outside of the US. Then at the sort of the same time, Tim Cook has pledged to boost his investment in the US by an extra $100 billion. I couldn't read whether is this sort of Apple being bullied into this by the president, or is this Apple getting exactly what they want?
So Fergus, I actually have a big announcement and I'm here to make it on your program. I'm very proud. I, Justin Wolfers, am actually pledging a $101 billion investment in the United States over the next 4 years. I'm very excited. There may be plants in Texas. There may be plants in some politically powerful states. I haven't yet called the White House to announce this, but my pledge is worth every bit of the word of Tim Cook, Donald Trump, or anyone else who's making a pledge like this.
Now, Justin, forgive me. I might ask you something slightly outside of your remit now, and it does relate to India, which you've already mentioned, because India is suddenly facing 50% tariffs. They've got the standard rate, but they've also got their additional 25% secondary tariff for buying Russian oil. Now, I'm not going to ask about that directly, but I've spoken to some sort of military analysts on this show, and I've kind of asked them the same question, but I want to ask you in a different way. What do you make out of Trump's policy to almost use trade and business as a means of foreign policy? Have you ever seen that before?
Actually, yes. One of the things I've been so I teach economics, and when I look at international trade, I do it through the lens of economics, and I have my students learn the supply and demand diagrams. But I also know from when I've spent time in Washington that international trade is foreign policy. Turns out the foreign policy folks are really bad at understanding the supply and demand side of it. Let me say the flip side of that, which is the economists are awfully bad at understanding the geopolitical implications of it. But if you think about it, actually the parallels between a trade war and a war are quite real and quite serious. In both cases, they're enormously destructive. In both cases, you're standing to lose your domestic population, who you represent, stands to suffer, as does your enemy's population as well. The suffering is different. This time I'll be doing out without my favorite olive oil as opposed to losing a son at war, but it's suffering nonetheless. And the whole point in both cases is we're both going to suffer, and whoever is willing to suffer the most will still be standing at the end. They'll persist and get some sort of an outcome. Look, if there's anything I admire about President Trump, it is in fact the fact that he's squeamish about war, that he doesn't want to see sons and daughters die. So I dislike his aggression and I dislike his bullying, but if he's going to do it, I would far rather he do it through tariffs than something else. So to give you a sense of how standard this is, realize that the first thing we do often is impose sanctions on other countries. When Russia invaded Ukraine, we imposed sanctions. That just says we're not going to sell your stuff and we're not going to buy your stuff. That's us imposing two types of tariffs on in both directions, in an effort to create economic pain rather than send young men and women over to die on the battlefield. So yes, it's actually quite standard. What's far less standard is the use of tariffs in such bizarre ways. And here I want to talk about the Brazil tariff. So Brazil is a country where they sell the US sells more stuff to Brazil than than the other way around, and that's something the president really likes. Ordinarily, that would earn Brazil a very low tariff, but he also really is quite upset because in Brazil, when they have an insurrectionist president, they try to put him in jail, which is something that, for reasons I think your viewers understand, the president seems to be against. And so he's actually imposed a 50% tariff on Brazil because they're using a domestic criminal system, to put someone who broke the law in jail. That is really striking. I've not seen anything like that from a major serious democracy ever. It's utterly absurd, and it's also an amazing breach of America First. This is the president helping his mates while having the American working middle class suffer because they're going to pay more for their, I think they're going to pay more for their coffee, but not their orange juice. There's exceptions galore. But it is very much using it as a tool of foreign policy.
We'll just end then with with this question to sum up. You've spoken about it already, but what chances would you put on the moment of the US entering a recession?
I'm going to give you some context first. So I think you might have asked me this 4 or 5 months ago.
Well remembered, I did. And I think, if I remember, I think you said it was a bit of a toss-up, 50-50.
Actually, I gave you a more subtle answer than that, and it's one that I really want to emphasize. So the problem is when you ask me how's the economy going to do, that combines two things. What's the president going to do, and how's the economy going to respond? So what I did at the time is I unpacked that. And I said at the time, this was either before or just after Liberation Day, I said if the president continues on the full Trump, then there's a 75% chance of a recession in the next year. And I also said if he backs off and is just a normal Republican president, that's a 25% chance. And I think I said, ordinarily at the start of the term, I would have said there's a 10% chance because the world economy actually looked pretty good at the start of the year. So he'd done enough to knock the chance up to 25%, but if he backed all the way off, 25%, but 75% if he goes to full Trump. And at the time, he was halfway between the two, which is why you remember it as 50-50. Well, let's fast forward. A recession didn't happen. Now, growth did slow, but it's quite clear he didn't do the full Trump. He backed off on Liberation Day. And some of the worst elements of what he talked about doing, he totally tacoed on. And so I think that initial forecast still seems pretty correct, which is if he does the full Trump, we're at 75%, and if he backs off, 25%. And the question is, where are we right now? You can tell me your answer on that, Fergus. I'd say we're probably close to halfway to a full Trump, but not all the way there. So I'd say there's a 40 or 50% chance of a recession over the next 12 months. The data held up a little better than I anticipated, although it's come back a little bit. So I'd say you can't say 40 to 50%, so I'll say a 45% chance of a recession over the next 12 months. But if he does more stuff like, if you move from firing the BLS commissioner to firing the Fed chair, that moves you into the full Trump category, and we'll be looking at movement much faster than that.
Well, as always, we'll be watching that over the next 12 months and see if those percentages change. But for now, Justin Wolfers, thank you so much for joining us on the Trump Report.
Your pleasure, mate.